you were under the water in the surf and you were tumbling upside down and getting beaten up against the rocks and the reef underneath and getting all torn up. And there's a storm raging, and God reached down and he just pulled you to the surface so you could catch your breath. And then he gives you a life ring and you're able to float on top of the water. So it's still storming, pounding, waves are still crashing, but you're above the water, not drowning upside down, tumbled in the surf beneath the water's surface. And then, after you'd caught your breath and you gotten your bearings, he hands you a surfboard and he takes you out of the surfboard and he teaches you to surf. And now, the same waves that were pounding you underneath are propelling you forward.
The enemy tells us we are safer hidden in shadows. But freedom comes when we speak, when we share, when faith small as a seed takes root and grows. And when it does, even the impossible begins to move. This is mustard seed power.
Welcome to Mustard Seed Power. I am your host, Yani Alfonso. Before we get started, thank you so much for being here today. I know you have a lot of listening options, and yet you chose to be here. So thank you, whether you're listening from your car or your walk or the gym or your kitchen. Thank you for being here today. Get comfortable. We're in for a great treat and a great show. Hey, while you're watching, take a pause and subscribe because you don't want to miss upcoming episodes. Thank you. Welcome to Mustard Seed Power, Sarah. We're so excited that you have joined us today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's been a long time.
Such a long time. And I am so honored. You've done so much. And I want to share with our listeners a little bit about you. And then we can jump in and you can share some more because I know you have a lot to share. Okay? So Sarah McDugal is our special guest today. She is a strategist, truth teller, certified chaos slayer for protective parents in high conflict custody battles. Sarah McDugal is a clarity coach and a founder of Freedom Navigator and Wilderness to Wild. In addition, she holds a master's degree and various certifications in Master Certified Professional Coaching, Danger and Lethality Assessment, Deceptive Sexuality and Trauma Treatment, and APS-ATS Model for Multidimensional Partner Trauma. So she is very experienced in her field and has a wealth of experiences that she can share with us. And so today, I love what you said here, Sarah, though. I love this part where it says that you like to encourage people to reclaim their power and protect their peace. I love that. I absolutely love that. Custody battles are not foreign to you since you yourself unfortunately experienced a very long, almost nearly a decade custody battle yourself with litigation and all the pain that goes with that. You're also an author and you've published many different books. You have an amazing website, Wilderness to Wild, with tons of resources on coaching and we're going to go ahead and write that down in our show notes so that listeners and viewers on YouTube can access those resources. Is there anything else you want to add for our listeners before we get started?
Well, I think you've covered it very generously. I actually, if I can throw it out there, I have a podcast as well that is about being a protective parent and also recovering from trauma and learning to regulate your nervous system. So that is free on Spotify and YouTube right now. It's called This Wild Journey. And I can give you the link for that too. If
Yes.
anybody wants to listen to those, they're like 15-minute segments. And one of the very fun things that my co host, Coach Bren, she and I do is we've been going through family movies, children's movies like Finding Nemo and The Wild Robot and Inside Out. And then we talk about them from a trauma informed lens and helping you with free family movie night discussion guides that you can download to talk to your kids about how to recognize tricky people or how to spot red flags of when somebody's not acting honestly or when words and actions don't match, so that you can teach your kids how to recognize red flags of abuse, but not naming people in your real life, not pointing fingers at family members or maybe even their other parent, but just teaching them principles that they can use for life. So that's really fun. And I don't think I'd even mentioned that to you beforehand. So we can definitely throw that.
Yes, so definitely add that link. And I love what you're doing because I really believe that that is the most powerful proactive route that we can take is to educate our children so that as they grow older, they can
Yes.
see the different signs.
Mhm.
Powerful
And
ministry.
that doesn't have to be a traumatized parent or a parent going through divorce. That is stuff that is really helpful no matter how stable or traumatic your household has been, because all of our kids are going to grow up and need to face challenges. They're going to face tricky people. They're going to have a boss from hell. They're going to have manipulative friends or maybe a bad dating partner. And they're going to need to know these things. So we have a lot of fun with it.
Yes, it's a great way to empower our upcoming generation. And by the way, now that you say finding new, I was very shocked to hear a comment on The Little Mermaid on one of your podcasts that you had done. I was like, oh my goodness, that's right. She gave up her voice. Oh, my, I had never thought about that.
Did. She did. She
You
was willing to trade her voice for attention from a boy and then realized she could not share with him who she was. He could not get to know her because she had let her voice be co-opted by someone who wanted to control her.
Wow. And that's exactly how I reacted when I heard you say that because I'm like, oh my word. And these are the shows and the movies that our young children are watching. So it's like this very slow, very negative education. Awful. And so I'm so
Yes.
excited for your podcast.
I mean, wait till you hear what I have to say about Beauty and the Beast.
No, I can't wait to hear about that. And
I
so
mean, she, all she has to do is just be nice enough and she can transform a monster into an ideal partner as long as she's nice enough.
see, the messages, it's crazy that we don't really recognize. Wow. So thank you so much for your work on educating our children and our upcoming generation. And I know that our listeners are probably going to react like I did, or like, oh my word, I've never heard that. So yes, definitely. We want to encourage all our listeners and our viewers on YouTube to please go to Sarah's podcast. And we're going to have the link at the bottom of our show notes. And so, Sarah, I wanted to have you on our show because you have so many stories and so many experiences. And I wish you could tell them all in 1 hour, but I know that that's probably not possible. Hopefully, we
You can
can
tell,
have you,
but not that.
but not that fast. But I wanted to start out with the question: have you ever had a time in your life where things got very rough, like very difficult, very almost unbearable, that you said, God, I just can't do this alone. I need you to show up for me?
Yes. I've had a number of those situations, but there is one in particular that comes to mind for sharing today. And it was a number of years ago. My kids are now taller and bigger than me in every way. But when they were little, I happened to be mired in what ended up being nearly a decade of custody litigation as a protective parent. And to kind of keep the context brief, but help you understand where I was coming from, I had been a ministry spouse, and then my life had exploded in front of my eyes when a lot of hidden things came to light. As a result of everything that happened, there was a season where my children and I spent 4 months homeless. We had a suitcase apiece in the back of my car, and we stayed with different friends while I tried to figure out how to get a job. And now, it wasn't that I wasn't qualified for a job. I actually had it, I had a lot of blessings. I had a lot of privilege that I recognize many women don't have in this situation. I had finished college, I had a professional wardrobe, I had skills, I had worked. But at the time, I was not employed. I had gotten left with a crippling amount of debt that I had not incurred. We did not have a home. I didn't have a job. It, what I had never thought about before was that when you are in this situation, especially as a mother, I work primarily with mamas. Um, and I am a mama, so that's the personal experience, that I come from. But when you're in this situation and life has exploded, you need childcare to be able to go to job interviews. In order to have childcare, you need to have a job to be able to pay someone to watch your kids. If you can't afford daycare and you don't happen to have family members who are safe and trustworthy to take care of your children, then it's very difficult to go find a job that will pay enough to afford daycare. And then there's the minor detail of housing. If you do not have a home, then you need to be able to make enough money to provide housing. And in today's economy, of course, this was years ago, but in today's economy, that's strangling many times. But in order to be able to get a job, you need to have a place to leave your kids or daycare. In order to get daycare and a house, you need to have a job. But if you don't have a house to live in, where do your kids stay, even if they're older, when you are going to work? And it's this snake eating its tail, and the noose feels like it gets tighter and tighter. And how do you break out of it? Well, so I was starting in that kind of situation, and I saw God come through for me many ways. But over time, um, it became obvious that I was not getting past the custody litigation part very quickly. And I wasn't going to get past that very quickly because of things that had happened to my kids and reasons that I needed to fight nonstop to protect them from further harm.
Hmm.
So, as a protective parent, and that's the term we call a parent who is trying to keep their children safe. As a protective parent, in the beginning, I did not realize that the court system tends to prioritize equal access for both parents much higher than it prioritizes the actual safety of the children.
Ouch.
That was a foreign concept for me. I didn't know that. I assumed naively, as many people do, that if something's happened that makes you unsafe, you just tell people and then the system is there to keep you safe. And that is not exactly how the system is structured. So I found myself in upside down in a system where all of my mama bear instincts were actually working against me
Wow.
in the court system. Because, and especially I was coming from a very, very conservative Christian environment where I had certain morals and values that I felt were non-negotiables for my children, and things like having them exposed to pornographic material or having them exposed to other types of immoral values were just deal breakers for me. And I could not understand how the court just didn't think that was a big deal at all.
Wow.
So, yeah. I don't know if you knew that.
Okay, so yeah, so wow,
You
this
may
is
want
a
to
lot.
pause there.
This is a lot,
I'm
right?
looking at the
This is a
facial
lot,
expression.
so that we can process this just a little bit.
Sure.
So this is what I'm seeing. I am seeing you in this vicious cycle of no home, no job, no childcare, and not being able to get out to get a job, not because you didn't have the skills or you even had the professional wardrobe, which sometimes we don't even think of, but
Right.
you
Some women
had
don't. Some women
you had a college degree, you had everything, and yet even with all that going for you, the fact that you were in this vicious cycle of I don't have a job, I don't have the money to pay for childcare. I don't. Therefore, if I don't have a job, then I can't have a home. If I don't have a home, now I'm homeless. And then also in the process of all that, keeping your children safe. And then what just hit me really hard was that I had never thought about that. Yes, you're right. I never thought that the court system actually prioritizes equal access over safety of children. Like that drives. Ugh.
yes.
Wow. Okay, I just had to do a quick
Yes.
recap.
Sure. Sure. And in those early days, I was able to get a job, and my parents were able to step in with support for helping with watching the kids. We were able to get a little home for reduced rent, and God answered all of those needs. So I don't want to skip past that part of the story because God came through for each of those needs. But then later, I was still fighting. After a couple of years, I was still deeply mired in trying to keep my kids safe in a system that is not built to prioritize child safety.
Mm.
And so, uh, I the day that comes to mind when you ask this question, I had an attorney that I was not sure this attorney was fighting for me. And I knew that I was upside down in my court case. And I was very, very worried about what was lying ahead for my kids and how to protect them. They were my world, still are, but they were little, and
Yes.
I needed to keep them safe at any cost. And I remember waking up that morning and praying, Lord, whoever is on this legal team, whether it's like the guardian ad litem or the opposing attorney or whatever, whoever's on this legal team that is not focused on keeping the kids safe, please remove them. Like
Mm.
just remove the ones that are the obstacles to keeping my kids protected. And then that morning, I had to go into town and have a meeting with my attorney. So I talked to my attorney, and she told me that day that I was this close to losing my kids because I kept talking about how they had experienced abuse. And
What?
she directly said, yes, she says, if you don't stop pushing this abuse narrative, you're going to lose your kids and you might get 1 hour of supervised visitation with them a week.
Are you kidding?
And I said, but I believe my kids. Like, they have verified CPS reports. I believe them. What am I supposed to do with that? What would you do with that if it was your kid? And she said, well, if you believe them and you're not going to drop this, I'm not going to be your attorney.
Oh.
And she fired me as her client. And I said, okay, what am I supposed to do? She's like, go find a new attorney, but I'm not going to be your attorney. And I said, oh, okay. And as we're walking down the hallway, she's walking me out to the front door to kind of shoo me out of her office. And I was like, just reeling. I froze it. I didn't really know what to say. And she said, you know what? just go live your life and stop fighting this thing.
What?
I'm like, what life? What life? I have no life if my kids aren't safe. What life are you talking about? And I didn't say that to her. This is exploding in my head. And she's like, but yeah, just find yourself a new attorney. And I walked out the door into this blazing hot sunshine. It's like 90 degrees outside. And it was like I heard in my head, let the giants fall. You prayed for me to remove anyone that was an obstacle to your children's safety. And I just did.
Wow.
And I was just, what do I do with that? What do I do? Where do I go? I don't know what to do next. Oh my goodness.
Be careful what you pray for. You might just get it.
Mm-hmm. So I went home. And of course, I'm equal parts terrified and frozen and wondering what God is going to do. I did know by this time that God carries you through.
Amen.
Now, I had already figured that out because there had been times where in the 2.5 years or whatever before this, in this process, like my kids had grown, but their shoes still fit.
Yeah, wow.
There were times when I had paid for things on my credit card and then gone to pay it off and the balance hadn't gone up, but the statement was there. The items were there, but my balance hadn't gone up. Like the math did not math. It was God math, not people math. And
I love that.
I had told God, I'm willing to go as far and as long as it takes to protect my kids and to do whatever I need to do. But you're going to have to provide because I can't make this work. I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel. And at that point, I was working extra contracts after put the kids to bed. I'd be up until 1 o'clock in the morning trying to make a little extra money on the side, writing this project, producing that thing. And I was working with other women who had been through betrayal trauma. And I didn't have a full business built. I was just trying to make ends meet. And
so, yes, I can
so
imagine how expensive that must have been for you to have to rehire a lawyer and go through that long a period of time fighting this.
it was astronomically costly. Legal fees, court fees, legal battles are an overwhelming drain on often some of the most impoverished and financially exploited people in society.
Sad.
And so it's a very heavy thing to carry. And so that night I went home and I laid in bed and I started looking on Twitter.
And
I
Twitter.
was just like, okay, I'm just going to start searching people who talk about family court and who talk about custody issues and who talk about this kind of stuff. And I started sending direct messages to people on Twitter, kind of hashtag asking for a friend, like, hey, I'm aware of a case where this is the story and this is what is needed. Do you know of anything? And over the next 24 hours, some people never answered. And some people blew me off. And some people offered suggestions that were absolutely useless. And one person said, I have exactly the person you need.
Mm.
And they connected me with a strategy coach who helped abuse survivors and protective parents survive the system and understand what the system wanted from them in order to better be able to protect their kids. And they said, here's the contact information. And I followed through and contacted them. And for the next 3 hours, this person listened and strategized and validated. And that next night was the first night I had slept well in a very long time.
Oh, God really provided.
God provided. And then I found a new lawyer, and she was young and scrappy and working out of her car. Now she's the senior partner of a high-rise law firm in downtown, and completely different, but we worked together for years, and God showed up. It didn't resolve that. The storm did not go away. Waves were still crashing, the wind was still blowing, the rain was still beating down, and it continued that way for years. That was not the end, it was the beginning of a shift. And sometimes I think we really want to see God work miracles where he just steps in and it's fixed. And that's not always the way it works. Sometimes he steps in. Sometimes he steps in and he just says, step this direction instead of that one. And now take the next right step. And you're just seeing one next right step at a time. You're not seeing the end and the finale. You're just getting the next right thing. But over years, it completely turned around. My kids have been safe for 4 years.
Yay.
They, at the time, at least that we're recording this, my kids are thriving and incredible young people with a huge heart for helping others as a result of what they experienced and what they've been through. And I saw God that day when he answered that prayer by removing my own attorney. I saw him prove again, and then again and again and again over time, that when we dedicate our energy and our passion to caring for our children, to doing what we know is right, he will follow through and carry us forward,
Amen.
even if the storm sticks around.
Right.
It does not really remove the storm, but it changes how we deal with the storm.
God doesn't promise us that the storms will go away. He just promises that he will be with us in the storm. And having him in the storm with us, just seeing how he does orchestrate each next step makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. Letting go of our insistence on being the one to manage all of that is a really big, important step.
So letting go of control and letting God do the controlling.
Yes, and that can be really confusing when, when everything feels out of control. That's terrifying.
So much so, especially when it has to do with your kids and keeping them safe. And you're like on hyper alert all the time.
Yes, and living in hypervigilance, I mean, that's a whole different podcast, what that does to your immune system and your
Your
autonomic
cortisol.
nervous system, the physical results of that, it's a thing.
So where were your children through this process of litigation?
Where, as in physically, or where
Physically?
emotionally?
No. Well,
Physically?
physically, yeah.
The majority of the time they were with me. There were times when they did have court-ordered parenting time back and forth, and that was very hard
It was
for them.
difficult on them.
Very, very. Yeah.
Did they resist? Like, did they not want to go to the other side, the other parent?
There were times when they would be trying to crawl into the trunk and hide, or trying to crawl behind the chairs in the seats in the car, or trying to hold on to the car and screaming and crying, not wanting to leave the car. And that was excruciating. I
I
have,
can't, I can't imagine
it
that.
is physically difficult for me to even describe those things,
Yeah.
because it was very, very.
I can't imagine. I can't imagine. Um, you mentioned that God did provide, sometimes when we pray for something, like you prayed that prayer, God, please remove the person that is not for my children's safety. And then he does. And then you're like, whoa, wait a minute. I didn't mean my lawyer.
Right? What am I supposed to do now, God?
It's like, no, not that person. That's like the key person that's kind of supposed to help me, in quotes, right?
Right.
And
If
yet
they're
you saw,
helping you.
yes, and yet you saw how moving to a strategy coach, how that person was able to lead you to the right person and the right lawyer, and how you ended up with a lawyer that was new in the field, but God used that lawyer in a mighty way for you to keep your children.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Um,
And a lot of it was learning how to speak the truth in a way that the system will listen.
talk to me about that.
Well, I, it's something that I work with my clients step by step on. It's difficult sometimes to condense that big, huge concept. But as a mom, let's just say you've been through hell in whatever it is that you've gotten out of for whatever reason, whatever things got you to the point of needing to protect your kids. You have a lot of stories, right? And you have scrolled TikTok and Instagram, and now you know the other person is a narcissist and they're a sociopath and they're this and they're that. And so you show up in court and you're like, hey, they're abusing us and they're narcissistic. And the court's like, oh, we hear this all the time. People just hate each other in divorce court. Y'all
Mm,
both just need to get along and stop being difficult. And you're like, no, but my kids are actually being harmed. They're like, okay, where's the bruises? And they're like, well, when there were bruises, I never took them to the hospital because I didn't, because especially conservative Christians are often taught to be very afraid of the police, very afraid of CPS, very afraid of anyone finding out. We handle things internally, right? Just traditionally in the conservative Christian community. So you're like, well, I don't have any records of that because we're supposed to forgive. And I never called the police. And they're
ouch.
like, okay, so where's your proof? And you're like, but I have my journal where I wrote about it. And they're like, anybody can write that. And you're like, but this is actually happening. Like my kids are coming back dysregulated. This is not healthy. And they're like, well, maybe you're just poisoning them against the other parent. Why don't you just tell them to not fuss? You need to make them feel better about this. You're like, but I can't make them feel better about going somewhere that they're not safe and they're scared. And they're
And that they
scared
don't want to
because of,
go to.
and they're like, well, then that's probably your fault. You're probably turning them against the other parent. And you're like, but I'm not. They're like, yeah, but you've only said negative things about the other parent this whole time. You're just trash talking the other parent all the time. Why don't you tell us all the good things the other parent does? And you're like, but I've told you this and I've told you this and I've told you this. And they're like, yeah, but you need to get along. It's your job to get along and not put the kids in the middle. So the parent who is trying to protect the children gets targeted to be forced to get along. And this is normal in the court system.
Wow. Okay.
Normal.
Right. So you mentioned that your other lawyer, the one that fired you, that you said fired you, she said
Yeah.
she told you you need to change the abuse narrative. In other
In other
words,
words, stop the truth.
yeah, don't listen to your kids. You said that your children actually had verified Child Protective Services reports.
Yeah.
So that was not proof.
It happened a long time ago.
So that didn't matter.
Parental rights trump a lot of things in the current system.
Well, that is so scary. So what happens when um I know, thank God you have your children and you were able to be successful with all that litigation of almost 10 years. But let me back up a little bit. What happens to the mom who maybe, we talked about that vicious cycle of not having a home, not having a job. If you don't have childcare, you can't get a job. If you don't have a job, you can't get a home, and you can't seem to get out of that, especially if you don't
Right.
have trustworthy individuals in your life that can support you with childcare to help you out of that. Or especially if maybe the person doesn't have a career, that they had before children. They don't have a college degree like you had. They don't have a wardrobe. And so I'm thinking about those moms, and I know you specialize in coaching and working with moms that probably are in situations like this. So what happens? How can we talk to me about how can we address those issues with moms that don't have a support system, that can't seem to get out? What other resources are there besides a trustworthy individual? Because if they don't have anyone, how do they get out? And I know you coach a lot of women.
Yes. So, one of the first things I want to say is that unfortunately, many women start with their pastors and their churches. And in far too many situations, certainly not all, but in the majority of situations, those churches and pastors are not necessarily trauma informed or aware of abuse. And they will often pressure women and children into reconciliation and then shun them if they are not successful with reconciling. Now, it's very interesting because many churches are very happy to have a single mom's ministry or to host a single mom's oil change event. But if you are in the process of becoming a single parent inside the church, that's a problem. Now, if
Unfortunately.
you're already a single parent, we will be happy to help you. But if you are becoming a single parent because one of the men that we love and respect as a deacon or a class teacher or a church elder or whatever, if you're leaving one of our beloved guys and you're saying that there's a problem in the home, that's a you problem. And we don't like to see families break up. So there's this very much a breakdown between how someone becomes a single parent and when they need support in many churches. Occasionally, I hear stories from women going through this kind of thing, and they did receive helpful support. But in general, one of the best things that you can do if you are in that situation is to start by contacting your domestic violence shelter. Or if you have a, a family justice center or a shelter services or women's services or intimate partner violence services kind of resource in your area. And you can just Google the nearest metropolitan area and domestic violence shelter or family violence services or family justice center. So if you have questions about whether or not you are experiencing abuse, and I actually have a free short course on this called Is This Abuse? How to Recognize Red Flags that we can throw a link up in the show notes and it walks you through it. But if you um, if you aren't sure whether or not you are experiencing abuse, talk to someone at your local domestic violence shelter, talk to a case manager, someone who can walk you through what you are experiencing and help answer those questions. If you are already sure that you and or your children are not safe, sexually, physically, emotionally, psychologically, financially, whatever it is, if you already are pretty certain that this is true, then your domestic violence services is where you want to start. Here's a few reasons why. Most women have no idea how many, at least in the United States, how many resources are available for professional wardrobe for job interviews,
Hmm.
for daycare vouchers, for rapid rehousing eligibility, for having a social worker sit with you and help you apply for food stamps or Medicaid or temporary financial support from the government, for food banks, for free counseling and therapy for yourself, your children. But the only way to, for free legal aid, the only way to get access to that is through the domestic violence shelter or family violence services. That is the portal that opens the door to make you eligible for all those other services that nobody talks about and that you may not have known even exist. I
Well,
didn't know that.
yeah.
I didn't know about any of those things. And so I had to navigate through without being aware of those resources. Now, that's the first thing I recommend women go to.
Okay, so
Start.
yes, you mentioned the word privilege, but you were blessed with having your parents, but a lot of women have nobody. And you're right. They don't know about all these resources. And so, in recapping what you just said, I understand the idea of the church dynamics when it comes to becoming a single mom, when it comes to divorce situations, and both parents or both husband and wife are part of that congregation. And yes, it's like we don't want to mess, we don't, that's too messy. But when you get to the other side, we'll be happy to help you. But you guys have to figure it out in the meantime. And so if you're the victim and the children are not safe, you really, and all you know is to go to your church and your pastor because that's all we've known forever, then you really feel kind of hopeless and helpless. And I'm wondering how much of that person's mental health is affected by feeling trapped.
A lot. It is significant. That sense of loss and loss of community, that sense of isolation, we were never created, I firmly believe this, to go through the agonies of life in isolation. And
Absolutely.
this is one of the most isolating journeys that any person can experience.
Yes.
Even now, I have a group of friends that have built over the years, and there's over a dozen of us who call every morning at 7 a.m. We have a prayer call and we touch base with each other daily. And if someone misses for 3 or 4 or 5 days in a row, we are checking on our girls because we have learned the hard way that we were created for community.
Absolutely. And so, talking about community, if you find where you're in the situation and you're trapped, the first next step, and I know usually we're like, okay, let's go, go to your pastor, go to someone in the church that can help. And unfortunately, that backfires so many times because of what you said. There are emotional ties to both of you in different ways, and nobody wants to hurt the other person. And it doesn't matter who's involved, they just don't want to get involved. And so, what you're saying is, don't start there. Definitely don't start
Right,
there.
right.
You're saying, go to Google domestic violence centers and shelters, family justice center, because here again, if someone doesn't have the money to even have a home, forget litigation. It's like, forget it. It's like, this
Right.
is this is futile. Like, how can I even move past all this if I don't even have money, never mind hiring a lawyer. But you're saying that the key here is to get connected somehow with a domestic violence center or shelter or family justice center type of support, because they are the ones that have access to these resources that you can benefit from if you're in this situation.
Yes, that is a
Yes.
starting point. It's not your end point, but it is a starting point. And I would even recommend that for women who do have an education, for women who do have potentially a career. Uh, Even if you didn't have a career, but you married into wealth, very often it is not your wealth. And
Mm.
if you leave, you will be leaving without your name on the bank account, without your name on the lovely home that you live in. You may or may not have a car actually in your name. I have a friend who runs a domestic violence shelter, and she said, we will have women show up here with like the latest handbags, driving a brand new BMW, but they don't have a penny to their own name. Like they have no way to actually cover expenses for themselves because
Okay.
everything was in their spouse's name.
Ouch. Okay. So I know from listening and reading some of your posts and information, I know that one of the ways that people that become experts in controlling an abuse is finances. You know, when you're having to, if you are working, having to hand over your check, or having to hand over, and he or she are the only people that have access to anything financial connected, and they kind of try to keep you away from learning how to manage the accounts, and if there are investments involved, like just kind of keep you in the back end of that. And so I can see how when things really go bad, how then all of a sudden you're like, oh my word, where do I even go? I don't even know how to write a check. I don't, back in the day with checks, I'm aging myself,
Sure. Checks. Who does checks, Yenny?
What is that?
Checks. But let me give you another scenario too, because that is one scenario. Here's another one. Another scenario is that the abuser hands over, like the abuser is cooperative with the victim's access to all of the family accounts. For example, the normal family budget. Maybe the mom, she sees the direct deposits from work, or there's a family account where money gets put, and she manages that. She has access to that. So she feels like she has access to the finances because she sees money come in. She knows when the mortgage is paid. Maybe the abuser is kind of scatterbrained and is always losing money or bouncing checks, or not bouncing checks, overdrafting
Overdrafting.
or whatever. So, so the responsible one, being the victim, is the one who manages the family budget. But what she doesn't know is that he's taken out 6 credit cards and 3 of them are in her name because he has all of her personal information. And she doesn't know that because he also has a P.O. box the next town over where he sends all of that information. And maybe he's taken out loans in their children's names, or maybe he's remortgaged the house and never told her, or maybe he's taken out personal loans for debts, or he's got co-signed and forged her signature on different expenses and different kinds of things. And she doesn't know that until she finally decides to leave. And then she actually discovers that he hasn't paid the taxes in 5 years, that there's IRS debt, that there's stupid loan debt, that there's credit cards racked up. And she thought they were solvent and maybe even, had $10,000 in the bank, which is a nice little nest egg if something happens or they need to, do repairs on the car or whatever. But she finds out they're actually $80,000 over upside down. and the house has been remortgaged and the cars actually don't belong to them and there's debt in her name. And I've known this happen to woman after woman after woman, and she had no idea because what she was allowed to see looked like it was fine, but there was this entire second other life.
Life. Wow.
And whether that was on gambling or prostitutes or porn or just frivolous spending or vacation stuff or whatever, she just didn't know. And legally, in equitable distribution, you generally get stuck with half the debt, even
Wow.
if you didn't know it existed,
Wow.
even if it's not in your name. Because when you're married, everything is split. Everything belongs to both of you. So helping women figure that out and untangle it and process the trauma of the betrayal every time they find a new lie, a new secret.
Wow.
It's heavy.
Heavy,
It's heavy.
intense, heavy and intense. And I'm also thinking about women who live a comfortable life, how that can become the trap of, or rather how they can feel trapped because they live a comfortable life and they don't want to leave the comfortable life. And even though it may not be verbally expressed to that person, if you leave XYZ, but that person
I know.
feels like they know it's like, if I leave, I don't want to lose my standard of living. Should I stick it out? Should I just stick it out and just do it for my standard of living? What do you say to those women?
What I say to them is that I cannot, no one, but you can make that decision for yourself. No one can tell you you must leave or you should stay. You have to weigh for yourself. What is the trade-off? What is the risk versus the benefit? Are you content living another 30 years with this emotional chaos in order to be able to continue having a comfortable standard of living? And some women decide, I am. I do not want to start over. And that is their decision to make. Other women are like, oh, heck no. No, 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 no. I don't want this to be the next 40, 50 years of my life. I'm not okay with that. I am going to make changes now so that I can get on my feet, so that I have at least, let's say it takes me 10 years. Then I have it. If I have 50 years left, that's still 40 years on the other side of this. And so when I'm working with clarity coaching, I help women ask themselves these tough questions. What is most important to you? Are you okay staying comfortable even if your partner is lying? Is that cool with you? Or is it cool enough that it feels like you can handle it? Because if you're going to choose to stay in that, you need to do it with your eyes wide open. You need to say, I know my partner is not faithful. I know my partner is not honest. I am making this decision knowing those things, and I am fully consenting to the truth as I know it. I'm
Wow.
choosing to.
Wow. And so definitely I would say, if you are anywhere on the opposite side of what you just described, which I just can't imagine, but I can see how I can see how some people value that much, that they're willing to give their life, really, their whole life
I am
for
not
it.
one of those people. I could not.
Mm-mm.
But I respect that some make that choice for themselves.
Okay. And for
And
those who don't,
we,
Sarah, for those
yes,
who don't, okay, for those who don't, um, what I'm hearing from you is better sooner than later.
generally, yes. There are
Okay.
caveats to that.
Tell me about the caveats.
Caveats could be, what if you have a child who is extremely ill and
Mm,
needs an incredible amount of medical support, and you know that if you leave right now, A, you will be working 3 jobs, you won't be able to be home caring for them. B, they're not going to have the medical coverage that they have right now. And C, you may not even be able to provide them a home that has, like, whatever handicapped accommodations that allows them to live. And so in that case, there are times when I see moms choose the sacrificial route and they say, I will stay until my youngest is 18 so that, sorry, I need to plug in my computer, so that I can get them to adulthood. And in the meantime, I will work on myself. I will work on my own healing, my own strength, my own emotional stability, so that I can make the decisions I will need to make when my child is able to stand on their own 2 feet, physically or emotionally or psychologically or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
medically. I see women make that decision at
And
times,
that is such a
and it is
tough,
sacrificial.
definitely sacrificial, and what a tough decision to have to make. But what I do like is that you just didn't leave it at the first half, which is I see women that choose to stay because they want their disabled child or their child that needs a lot of medical support to have the medical support that they need until they're 18. You didn't leave it there. And that for me is very important because the second half of that was while I work on myself. While I work on
Yes.
myself. And so for those women, that's why we have the Sarah McDugals that have a coaching program that they can reach out to. And that's why they have, okay, so with those women, do you think those women would benefit from reaching out to the resources that domestic violence centers or shelters or family justice centers can offer?
They can. They
Yeah.
can.
So even if they're choosing to
Because
be home?
even if they're choosing to stay temporarily or for a season, it is never a bad idea to know what is available to you. Like, before you strike out on a long walkabout, as they call it in Australia, before you decide to hike the Appalachian Trail, you gather the maps, right?
Mm-hmm.
You check the weather patterns. You decide whether or not you're taking this route or that route. You look at all the variables. And so one of the things that I do as a coach, which is very different from therapy or counseling, my job is to help you assess all the variables. Not to dig into, oh, well, it's probably my parents' fault and that was their parents' fault. And if go to therapy to dig into all of the emotional feelings of things. I'm here to help you make a plan. And your plan may be to leave now. Your plan may be to leave later. Your plan may be to leave never, but improve yourself in the meantime. What I'm here to do is help you live and love well. Sometimes that means leaving well. Sometimes that means staying well. Sometimes that means staying well temporarily while preparing to leave well. But what my goal is to help women live well as they were created to live, in wholeness, in healing, and in safety.
I love that.
So, whatever it takes to get there, everyone's path will look different, and every client is the architect of her own journey.
Wow. Every client is the architect of their own journey. I love, that's what God has intended for us. That's the kind of life that God has intended for each and every one of us to live. He wants us to live loved and he wants us to live well. I think it's sad that things do come up in our lives that unfortunately we also have to make the decision to leave well. And so I love your job. I love your job because I had never really I'm glad that I'm having you on this show because personally, if I've never experienced anything like that, I can never even help someone that is going through something like that. And so that's why I started Mustard Seed Power, is because in sharing our stories, we empower each other. and we provide resources that otherwise people would not know. Like, I didn't know some of the stuff that you shared with me today. And so, how can I help somebody else if I am not informed myself? So, even for listeners go ahead.
I was just thinking that's why I chose the themes that I did for the organizations that I run. Out of the wilderness into the wild. So wilderness to wild is that trauma journey for betrayal, trauma, and clarity. And walking alongside and with the court stuff and the divorce and custody cases when you're dealing with high conflict. That's why I'm not just there to tell you what to do. It's why I call it a freedom navigator,
I
because
love that.
you are navigating to freedom.
And
And
that
it's a
is your
journey.
new coaching program. Talk to us about that
Yes.
with clarity.
So, for high conflict divorce and custody coaching, when you are a protective parent that is mired in just drowning in the overwhelm, the nightmare of family court, and you're trying to keep your kids safe, but you're also trying to recover from your own trauma, but you're also trying to figure out what they want you to do, but you're also trying to help your kids regulate when they come back from the other parent because they come back like, whoa, completely dysregulated. And that takes a lot of energy from you, but you also need to go spend 6 hours going through mandatory disclosures for your custody case. And you're also working 3 jobs to try to pay for your lawyer. Like you just, the process of trying to have a strategy and understand the system. Lawyers don't hold your hand. They expect you to know what you want to do with your case, generally, and you're not a lawyer. So, how on God's green earth would you know how you're going to navigate the system that you've never worked in and never been trained for? It's overwhelming. And that's what I help parents do. I help them get a grip on what the true facts are, how to express those true facts, how to do that in a way that paints them as the supportive, safe parent instead of the weird, paranoid, controlling parent that just won't get along, and how to leave a rock solid paper trail, gather that evidence so that the court will take it seriously, communicate without emotion, which is really
Mm.
hard when you've been traumatized,
Mm-hmm.
focus on the facts, and stay regulated with their nervous system so that they can be the best parent possible for their children's needs in this process. So with Freedom Navigator, I do this a couple of ways. There's one-to-one, just like Zoom sessions, but I also have what I call BASECAMP. And BASECAMP is a group strategy support. I have weekly calls. You can hop in at any time on the calls. I have my tactical guides, step by step, how to understand different court processes. I have templates to help you organize your evidence and keep track of all your information so that you can show it to people and it makes sense. And it's not just your hand scribbles all over the place looking like a crazy person. So I have all of that structure because I figured, you know what, if I'm going to spend a decade doing this, I am going to make sure that other people who are in my shoes benefit from all the systems I have created for me to survive. So
Good for
I've
you.
turned those into something available for others. And it's for like 25 minutes of your attorney's time. You can be in that every month. Ongoing. It's a monthly retainer, super affordable. And then for those who really want customized handholding, and they want, like, if you want me to sit there and review your messages and help you redraft them before you send them to your ex, I do that too. I do that too. That's a small caseload. So there's a waiting list for that because I cannot do that for everyone and also take care of my family. But
Right. Right.
that is available and it brings people together so they are no longer operating in that isolation.
I love that.
'Cause every week, you get to meet up with other protective parents and know that you're not alone and hear what they're going through and connect with each other,
And so
and
having
it
that support system,
transforms. Yes. It transforms
transformation.
kids.
Yeah.
Yes.
Community is so valuable when you are in such a vulnerable situation where you feel like you don't have anybody, when you feel like you're alone and you're the only one in the whole world going through this, and nobody can possibly understand your pain and what you're going through. But Freedom Navigator and your BASECAMP sounds like they would really help someone that's feeling like, you know what, my church doesn't get it. Um, you know, they're blaming him, they're blaming me. They want us to get together. They don't care if my kids are safe. Like, someone who's in that position where they're like, my family doesn't even get it. They love my ex, or they love my husband, and they don't believe that he's doing XYZ because he's always so sweet and wonderful and provides so much for them. You have all that as well.
All of it. Oh, yeah. And my lawyer doesn't explain anything. My lawyer doesn't tell me what's going on. My lawyer just says, hey, we have a court hearing and you need to show up. And I'm like, okay, well, what the heck is it for? What are we doing? What got filed? And a lot of times, attorneys don't have that communication. So now you can understand.
Yeah. And so now,
Be prepared for it.
so I like the idea that you can help people. You don't give them answers. You don't say, you have to do X and Y and Z. No, that's not what you do. Coaching is more about leading people to understand their facts, where they are, and what their resources are to possibly take their next step. But you don't tell people,
Yes.
you have to do this, you have to do that. That is really decisions that only they can make, like you stated earlier. And so that's why what you provide is so valuable, because sometimes people are just overwhelmed, so confused. The court system is working against them. Their kids are not safe. Financially, they're a mess because of some of the possible things you mentioned. And it is so much that they really need like an outside voice that understands, that can coach them through sometimes just asking them questions so that they can get their own clarity in their own mind and then make their own decisions. Yes?
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
what
It's
you
the
do so
empowerment.
well. The empowerment. So you empower women to be able to kind of stay in the present also, because we mentioned mental health. We mentioned how some of this stuff can be so overwhelming that it affects your mental health. And when your mental health is affected, then you are not effective in anything, because
Yes.
you're having a hard time just getting up in the mornings, right? So by you coaching and providing clarity, what you're actually helping to do is, what I'm understanding, is allowing people to stay grounded. Stay grounded.
Yes.
So that they have the strength to be able to communicate their emotions while they're in a self-regulated state in the midst of chaos.
Yes. Yes. Can I give you a word picture for that?
Yeah,
Because
go for it.
I feel like sometimes when we have a visual, we can latch onto that visual and it feels so much clearer, right?
Yes, give me a visual.
So at one point when I was drowning, one of my dearest friends messaged me, and I woke up at like 4 o'clock in the morning and read her message. And she said, don't think I'm weird, but I had a dream about you. And I have to tell you what it was. And I'm like, okay, all right, what is it? And she said, you were under the water in the surf, and you were tumbling upside down and getting beaten up against the rocks and the reef underneath and getting all torn up. And there's a storm raging.
Mm-hmm.
And God reached down and he just pulled you to the surface so you could catch your breath. And then he gives you a life ring. And you're able to float on top of the water. So it's still storming, pounding. Waves are still crashing, but you're above the water, not drowning upside down, tumbled in the surf beneath the water's surface. And then After you'd caught your breath and you gotten your bearings, he hands you a surfboard and he takes you out of the life ring and he puts you
Oh,
on the surfboard and he teaches you to surf. And now the same waves that were pounding you underneath are propelling you forward. It's the same water. It's the same storm. It's the same amount of fierceness and power. But what was killing you is now moving you forward. The circumstances have not changed, but you have changed.
the
You are now a
metaphor.
world surfer instead of drowning at the bottom of the ocean.
A world-class surfer. What an incredible metaphor. You painted that picture so, so beautifully. And I cannot think of a better way to kind of like leave that image in the mind of our listeners so that they can see that, yes, the storm may not be going away as quickly as they want to, but God is sending that ring and then eventually pulling you out, and eventually you will be on that surfboard, and eventually you will be propelled like Sarah McDugal has been able to do, with all your experiences. Here you are with a coaching program that has helped so many, that you continue to help, so many books that you've written, your podcast, and you've taken all your difficulties, and all the research that you did for your own situation, and now you're able to share with women that can get the resources and the help and the encouragement and the coaching that they need so that they can surf to safety. Wow. Were there any Bible verses that kept you um, going through this very tough time?
Yes. So let me decide which one I want to share. I think one of my favorites was that I will contend with them that contend with thee, and I will save thy children.
Wow, that's beautiful.
And I claimed that promise over and over again that God would save my children.
So holding on, and talk to me about the importance of, even though you may have felt abandoned, you may have felt rejected by your faith community, yet not allowing that to define Sarah McDugal, and not allowing that to pull your faith away in your relationship with God. Because I truly believe that you are stronger because you had that faith. You didn't give up on God because your community gave up on you, possibly.
Yes, very much so. I discovered in the journey that my faith could not be in organizational structures or other groups of humans. My faith belonged in Jesus alone.
Amen.
And my faith has taken a much different shape as far as my personal relationship with Jesus, instead of relying on infrastructures around me to kind of prop that up. My understanding of how Jesus wants to relate to me and how I relate to Jesus is much deeper and more personal than it ever was when I was much more caught up in performing a role
Mm,
that was expected of me, because I was a ministry spouse and I spent many years very much in a public ministry role as part of that team. And so leaving that was one of the things I lost, right? That was yanked away when I was no longer a ministry spouse. I was no longer involved in my part, my half of the ministry that had been with that ministry
mm,
as a spouse. And that loss was grieving. And I had to figure out, where did I stand with God? Because I was one of those girls I waited for marriage, I prayed, I did all the right things with purity culture and how to, follow all the rules. And I was like, okay, God, I did all the right things. Why did it not work out for me? Because I followed the formula. I'm
mm.
supposed to have a blissful marriage and happy kids and a complete home and not be like those people that didn't do all the right things and, they reap what they sow. But how am I reaping what I sowed? Because I did all the right things. And
That's
I
a
had
hard
to duke that
question.
out with God for a bit.
Woo!
That's another podcast. That is a whole separate topic. But in that journey, I learned that God has really broad shoulders and he can handle really angry questions and he can carry a whole lot of heartbreak. And he is still there and he is still calm and he is still loving and he will still carry me through.
Amen. That's beautiful. And so for the listeners, the same thing for them. God will still carry them through. And as we wrap up, how can we summarize? We've talked about so much, but what would you like to leave our listeners with that maybe either one, experiencing difficult situations like we've talked about today, or two, may just want knowledge because they have friends that they may need to support or family?
Yes. So with that, whether you are experiencing this personally or you have someone you love that desperately needs this, I want to say this. God created us to live in safe community. And if your community is not safe, you have God's permission to seek safety. Your nervous system was built to live in safety and calm, not to live in constant vigilance and constant activation and fear and stress and toxic trauma.
And chaos.
So, and chaos. If that defines your life, whether you are wondering if it is abuse or you've already decided that and you're on the other side and you're experiencing post-separation abuse, I want you to know that God makes it so clear in his word that we are created to live safely and in peace and in harmony and in community. And if you are struggling to provide that for your children and you need clarity, you need a sense of freedom and how to get to that freedom on the other side, you don't have to do that alone.
That's beautiful. And that's why we're going to go ahead and link all the resources that we've discussed today so that they can reach out to you, Sarah. And I want to thank you for being on our show today. This is going to help so many people, and this has been so valuable. Oh, my word. I learned so much in this 1 hour that I've been with you. And I thank you. I know you're a busy lady, but I thank you for taking time to be here on Mustard Seed Power. And for our listeners, next week we have another guest speaker, so make sure to tune in. But thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you for having me. I can
Okay, this is a wrap. Remember to like, to share, to subscribe, to review. It helps our channel. We encourage so many others. We need you. We need each other. From seed to strength. This is Johnny. Until next time, peace out and keep growing.
You were under the water in the surf and you were tumbling upside down and getting beaten up against the rocks and the reef underneath and getting all torn up. And there's a storm raging. And God reached down and he just pulled you to the surface so you could catch your breath. And then he gives you a life ring and you're able to float on top of the water. So it's still storming, pounding, waves are still crashing, but you're above the water, not drowning upside down, tumbled in the surf beneath the water's surface. And then, after you'd caught your breath and you gotten your bearings, he hands you a surfboard and he takes you out of the life ring and he puts you on the surfboard. and he teaches you to surf. And now the same waves that were pounding you underneath are propelling you forward. It's the same water. It's the same storm. It's the same amount of fierceness and power. But what was killing you is now moving you forward. The circumstances have not changed, but you have changed. You are now a world surfer instead of drowning at the bottom of the ocean.